You know, when we think about U.S. presidents, we usually remember them for their policies, their big wins, or maybe their failures. But there are four presidents who are remembered for something else entirely, for how their lives and their time in office came to a sudden, violent end. So let's dive into this really somber but absolutely crucial part of America's story.
4. That's the number. We're not talking about presidents who were defeated in an election or removed from office. We're talking about 4 leaders who were murdered while serving the country. And each one of these events sent these massive shockwaves across the nation and really changed its path forever.
So we're going to look at each of these 4 major turning points. We'll start with Lincoln, right at the end of the Civil War. Then we'll get into the bizarre and tragic death of James Garfield. After that, William McKinley, whose murder brought a whole new threat into focus. And finally, the big one, the JFK assassination that honestly still haunts us today.
All right, let's start with the 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. This is a man who guided the United States through its absolute darkest hour, the Civil War.
And here's the incredible tragedy of it all. Lincoln's greatest triumphs, saving the Union, ending slavery, those were the very things that painted a target on his back. By winning the war, he created these powerful, bitter enemies who felt like their entire world had been ripped away.
And get this, just 5 days, 5, after the Civil War was officially over, the unthinkable happened. Lincoln was at a play, finally able to relax a little and celebrate the peace, when a well-known actor, John Wilkes Booth, shot him. Just like that, the nation's leader was gone, right when the hard work of healing was supposed to begin.
As Booth jumped from the balcony to the stage, he reportedly shouted this Latin phrase. So what does that even mean? Tussa amper tyrants, thus always to tyrants. It tells you everything about his motive. He didn't see Lincoln as a hero. He saw him as a tyrant who had destroyed the South. This was a clear act of political revenge. So the really big deal here isn't just the personal tragedy. Lincoln's death basically decapitated the government at its most fragile moment. His vision for a more gentle reconstruction, gone. Instead, the country plunged into years of bitter political fighting which threw the future of the South and millions of newly freed African Americans into total chaos.
Okay, let's move on to our next story, which is, wow, it's tragic in a completely different and honestly almost unbelievable way. James A. Garfield was president for just 200 days before he was shot.
Now, his assassin wasn't some political fanatic. It was a man named Charles Guiteau, a disgruntled and deeply unstable guy who thought he was owed a government job. When he didn't get one, he decided the president himself had to go. His motive was all about personal grievance, nothing more.
But here it is. This is the most shocking part of this entire story. The 2 bullets that Guiteau fired into President Garfield, they weren't fatal.
For almost 80 agonizing days, Garfield just lingered. And all the while, doctors, who really didn't understand germ theory yet, kept probing his wounds with unsterilized fingers and tools. He didn't die from the gunshot. He died from a massive infection that was given to him by his own doctors. It's just heartbreaking.
The public was so horrified by the assassin's motive, this idea that someone felt entitled to a job, that it sparked a huge change. Garfield's completely preventable death led directly to major civil service reforms. It basically ended the old spoils system and created the professional government workforce we have today. A truly profound legacy born from a terrible tragedy.
All right, let's jump forward in time right to the turn of the 20th century with President William McKinley. He was a very popular president, leading America as it was becoming a real global power. McKinley's assassin, Leon Czolgosz, represented a completely new kind of threat. He was an anarchist. He didn't have a personal grudge like Guiteau or a Civil War motive like Booth. He had an ideology. He believed all governments were evil, and he wanted to strike a blow against the entire system by killing its most visible symbol. And where this happened is so important. McKinley was at a public exposition in Buffalo, New York, just shaking hands with people in a receiving line. Think about that. He was completely out in the open, totally exposed. It was just a different time, a much more open and less security-focused era. And this slide shows you the direct result. Before McKinley, presidential security was kind of informal, a bit hit or miss. After he was killed, Congress acted fast and officially gave the Secret Service the full-time job of protecting the president. Literally every motorcade, every agent you see today can be traced right back to this moment.
And that brings us to the assassination that is just seared into our collective memory, John F. Kennedy. He was more than a president. He was a symbol of youth, of energy, and the hope of a whole new generation.
The scene itself is just iconic, right? And that's largely because it was so incredibly public. The motorcade in Dallas, the crowds cheering, the TV cameras rolling, this didn't happen in some dark alley. It happened in broad daylight for the whole world to see, and it was captured on film forever.
Now, the official government investigation, the Warren Commission, came to a very clear conclusion. A lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, was the killer. Case closed, right? Well, not exactly. Because just 2 days later, Oswald himself was shot and killed on live television while he was in police custody.
And that opened the door to the one question that has been echoing for decades. The neat, tidy conclusion of a lone wolf assassin was just blown to pieces, leaving a vacuum filled with endless speculation. So the real legacy of JFK's assassination wasn't a new law or a new government agency. It was the birth of a deep, lasting cynicism in America. It was the moment a huge part of the public stopped believing the official story, creating a rift of distrust in the government that, you could argue, we still feel today.
So when you step back and look at all four of these, it's pretty clear they weren't just isolated tragedies. They were four very distinct turning points. Each one forced the United States to face a crisis and change in a really fundamental way.
This table really just lays it all out perfectly, doesn't it? You go from a political motive in the Civil War that changes Reconstruction, to a personal grudge that creates civil service reform, to an ideological attack that builds our modern security state, and finally to a disputed motive that just shatters public trust. Each act of violence forced a specific and profound reaction that literally reshaped the nation.
And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. When a president is assassinated, what is it that really dies? Is it just the person, or does a little piece of the nation's hope, its promise, die along with them?